Hey everyone, it is Sunday, 4th of September 2022, but the glory of YouTube is that you can be watching this at any time in the future as long as YouTube and the internet still exists. And it is, yes, Sunday the 4th of September. And today I'm going to be talking about Suede's 8th studio album, released in September 2018, which is now 4 years ago, which seems much more recent than 4 years ago. It is The Blue Hour, and I'm going to be talking about the album and the tour and all the other stuff that goes with it. It is an album that I think at the time that it came out, it didn't quite connect with me the way that all the other Suede records had connected. But over time, I've wrapped myself deeply around this record and love it enormously after, as a fact. This was also one of the Suede albums where there wasn't very much in the way of singles. So basically it's going to be me showing you the contents of a box set. You've probably already gathered, though, I've got years of practice doing that. My previous ratio for doing these Notcasts is about 2 a week. I've slowed down a little bit recently, probably because there's a thing called life and the outside world, and it just seems to be barreling on. There's a lot more shows than there were obviously during lockdown. A lot more concerts, more social events. I do a little bit more travelling. I see more people. I go more places, and I go to the office far more regularly than I did previously. I have far more in the way of actual tangible social interactions now than perhaps I did during lockdown, because certainly during lockdown, the highlight of my social life was buying ice cream from the local supermarket. Actually, though, considering I'm going to be 50 next year, I think maybe the highlight of my social life now is buying ice cream from the supermarket. Today is probably the last day of summer. I looked at the weather forecasts, and from tomorrow onwards for the next 12 or 14 days is going to be black sheets of rain, as the great Bob Mould said. So perhaps this is the last day of summer. What better way to spend the last night of summer than talking to my mobile phone about a 4-year-old album that's generally quite miserable and tough going. Have you seen the contents of my record collection? Yes, you have. It's all sad songs that make me feel good. Phew, what's ever going to change? 2018 was 2017 actually was the first year of silence from Suede in a long time. It was the first year that I think any member of Suede did absolutely nothing publicly. Even the year 2000 and the year 2001, which were really, really quiet, were years where the band played a couple of shows, and sort of, even in the solo period, there was activity. But 2017 was the first year where absolutely nothing publicly happened from Suede. But the silence was broken in early 2018 with the publication of Brett's first memoir, Coal Black Mornings, a relatively slim tome, 230-ish pages. Now let's look at it. 208. That goes very, very quickly. That is his autobiography, and it's a fascinating read, by the way. If you're a fan of the band, very definitely worth reading to get an insight into what life was like in Suede. And in 2019, this was then followed up with Afternoons with the Blinds Drawn, the story of the band's first incarnation from the release of the first single, The Drowners, to the moment backstage, which I think at the Jonathan Ross show or Tier 5 Friday or something like that, where Brett told everybody that he couldn't do it anymore and it had to come to an end. There has not been a third part yet. The story is still being written, of course. And so those two, by the way, are really useful to read to understand, I think, perhaps some of the backstory as to what happens in the album The Blue Hour. And to start off with, I'm going to go through the Super Mega Deluxe box set version of the album, now out of print. This was I bought this one at Rough Trade East for the in-store show that took place on the day that the album was launched. I also saw the band I think the day before or the day after, when they played HMV, and here is the HMV limited edition blue vinyl that has "Event, please give customer" wristband on it as well. So there you are. Coloured vinyl is possibly God's way of telling you you've got too much money. In fact, even on on the deluxe edition of the Blue Hour, Matt makes a joke about doing a bubblegum coloured vinyl version of Coming Up in 2021. How little they knew. I think it was actually a slightly different shade of bubblegum, but there you are. So the Blue Hour, the band's 8th studio record, when this came out, I was in a strange place. My head wasn't perhaps as healthy as it always has been. I was struggling with some things in my head relating to aging and identity, and I was like in my mid-40s, and in your mid-40s people think that maybe you should stop doing the things that you love and start doing boring things, or maybe I should take up washing my car and going to the garden centre or something like that, where I was still sat there going, do you know what, I think I'm going to go to about 60 gigs this year. I'm going to travel all over Europe to see bands that I love. I wasn't going to grow old as such. Well, I was going to grow old, but I was going to grow up in a slightly different way to the way lots of people do. I thought, am I still, is this dignified? And then I realised some guys, they buy sports cars and stuff, and that's not particularly dignified. Sorry, everyone I know who's got a sports car, by the way, but there are some hallmarks of a midlife crisis, and I don't think I've succumbed to any of those, really. But the Blue Hour was an album that didn't quite connect with me the way that Night Thoughts did, and I think perhaps part of the reason for that is there is a narrative that runs through the Blue Hour, which isn't quite as obvious as the narrative that runs through Night Thoughts. And the experience that I had of listening to the Blue Hour for the first time was not with the band playing the album in full in front of me with the film like Night Thoughts, but putting some headphones in and going for a walk whilst I listen to this record, which is how I consume an awful lot of my music these days. So the Blue Hour's narrative structure, it's the themes that went through it like a stick of rock, the ideas that the album had, the stories that the album was telling were not as immediately apparent. You had to work a little bit further at it. Now, over time, what's become apparent to me is that the Blue Hour is an album written from the perspective of a child who is experiencing a family going through a traumatic event. And part of that, especially on a song like Wastelands and Mistress, is around the child seeing what would happen in a family if the father figure has an affair, and the discovery of that. And certainly when I was a child, although it was never as obviously pointed out as such, I think that happened in my family. So as a 9, 10-year-old in Birmingham in the 80s, I saw and heard things that made me think that something wasn't quite right in the setup of the family, and that the father figure was playing away, and it was really difficult for me because at the age of being 9 or 10, you look at your father and you kind of think of him as a heroic example of the person that you would want you to be when you get to that age, and that was not the example which I had, and also that you would hope that an adult would care and nurture for you and help you through this life until you have the tools and skills to be able to be an adult in your own right, which is not my experience of my family when I was growing up. Every family is fucked up in its own unique, weird ways, as was mine, as was pretty much everybody else's. But certainly, as a child, I was not perhaps mature enough to really understand that, as an adult, your job is to, amongst all the other things, is to take care of the people around you and to be a good human being. As editors sang on Munich, people are fragile things, be careful what you put them through. And it was one of the things which came through the Blue Hour for me. So let's go into the box set before I get too much into feeling like I should be on a couch talking about my family history, which I'm kind of doing anyway. Like the super deluxe version of the album. It's a 14-song album with two extra songs that were written during the time that it was done, one of which was released and one of which hasn't, and it comes in a flip top thingy. Here's a signed piece of card. That signed piece of card doesn't come with the Blue Hour, by the way. That signed piece of card comes with this Amazon edition of the best of Suede, but it has to fit somewhere. And there's my booking confirmation. I spent $59.99 on this. But I did get a Suede show at Rough Trade East which I probably would have paid about 30 quid for, because that's about the price of a gig ticket. You get a lyric insert here, and we're going to go through that when we talk through each one of the individual songs. On the special edition, you also get 5 discs. So the first one is a card sleeve version of the album itself, your standard 14-track CD, which is, as you probably know, really bloody good. The second one is an instrumental version of the album, which features the instrumental takes before the vocals were added to it. Instrumental versions of albums are prepared. They're normally used for things like TV appearances, but by default they're created just so that if people need an instrumental version of a song, for example, for a TV or something like that, it's there. And also the instrumental textures that you have inside the Blue Hour is a very dense album instrumental. And when I talk through each one of the songs, I will get to that. The third disc is the Blue Hour with commentary. So that's a DVD that features 4 different audio tracks. One with Brett talking through the album, one with Matt and Richard, one with Neil, and one with the producer, whose name I have forgotten because I can't see it at the moment, talking through the album and their insights into the record, alongside a trailer and 2 videos, one for The Invisibles and one for Don't Be Afraid If Nobody Loves You. And those were 2 of, I think, the 4 singles which were released from the album. The main kind of other part of it is a standard black vinyl version of the album. This is my listening copy of the Blue Hour. If I listen to it on vinyl, I listened to it recently. It's a phenomenal record, and I think I have to talk through the songs on it individually as we go along. And then the 5th disc is a one-sided 7-inch single, Manipulation, which was played live by the band a few times on the 2019 tour. It is one of the very few recent era Suede songs that have been played live that I haven't seen them play. But it's a loud, spiky thing that definitely wouldn't have fit on the album. Probably would fit on the upcoming Auto Fiction LP, actually, but definitely not on that. And then we have the album itself, the Blue Hour, which is, well, here it is. And that's a 14-track LP on the box set, 2 vinyl discs, 2 black vinyl discs. And then we have the lyrics set here. So let's go through the lyrics set and see what's in here, and talk you through all the things that there are. And so, you know, you can get a feel for what's happening. There are a number of small individual, very small actually, postcards which give you, there's probably I think 15 of these, 16 of these, which give you information around the album. So who designed the sleeve, who did the production, Alan Moulder, with additional production by Neil Codling, who wrote the individual songs and played the individual parts on them. And most of the album, by the way, has string accompaniment, if that's a word, played by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and occasionally a choir, which is the Hackney Wick Women's Choir. And kind of, although really these are parts which are played by Neil on keyboards when the band play the songs live, it just makes that album, gives it an extra layer of I think drama and tension. So let's go through each one of these in order. But that's the Blue Hour there. That's the cover, or at least part of the cover. Although that's probably actually out of focus, or maybe that's out of focus as well. Who knows? So the first song on the album is As One, and As One is, I think it's a really interesting song. It sets the scene for the rest of the LP, and it bookends the album, because there's a musical motif that runs through As One, which also runs through the album's last track, Flytipping, and that's a guitar motif that was taken from an unreleased song called White Widow. And what it has drama, it has kind of like tension, it kind of unfolds every part of the songs it goes along, and a great opening track on an album, really, really important. If you go all the way back in time to the midst of lockdown, I think Notcast 16 was me talking about sequencing for albums, and one of the key things for an album is the opening track should slowly introduce each of the musical elements that you're going to hear throughout the rest of the album, and it sets the tone for the album, and it works an introduction that allows you to to experience every part and give each part the respect and time that it deserves. So yes, and As One, by the way, is it's based upon, or at least the string accompaniment to it is heavily influenced by a very well known piece of music called "The Victims of Hiroshima," also known as 837, by Penderecki, which I listened to recently and can be heard in part on the Manic Street Preachers "You Love Us," and also in episode 8 of the Twin Peaks a return from 2017. You know, that phenomenal episode that a while ago I said was the best thing I saw in the whole of the 2010s. It's part of the musical accompaniment for there. And in episode 8 of Twin Peaks The Return, there is a completely mind-blowing segment which features a nuclear explosion and kind of intimates from that and suggests from that the nuclear explosion was somehow a release of all of the evil energy on the planet. And so you think about things like, well, people start seeing UFOs after the atomic explosions because suddenly, the aliens were interested in what was going to be happening on the planet and all that type of stuff. But listening to it, the Penderecki track is very, very threatening and probably should have been used in The Shining, actually. But it has a sense of threatening drama which is all through As One and then runs like a stick of rock through the rest of the Blue Hour. It's also based, I think, on a little bit on a piece by Debussy, although I don't know the name of it because, frankly, I've cribbed a lot of these notes from Neil's commentary on it. But it's really a song which is about the dawning of adulthood, and it's about where you start to kind of step away from childhood into adulthood and the revelation that at some there's no point where somebody gives you a certificate and goes, "You're a man now, my son," like the Rudyard Kipling poem. There's just a day when suddenly he goes, "Oh, I'm doing adult stuff. I'm paying bills. I've got a job. I've had my heart broken, or I'm looking after a cat," and suddenly he goes, "Oh my, I'm an adult. When did that happen?" It's not like somebody goes, "You're an adult now." Because obviously the age of consent for various things changes. The age of sexual consent, the age where you can start to vote, the age where you start to pay tax, the age where you start to, join the army, those type of things. The days where you don't need someone who's got legal power or authority. The day when you can be charged for a crime is 10, for example. The day where you can join the army, I think, is 16. The day where you can vote, I think, is 18. There's a slow sliding scale towards adulthood. There's not suddenly a day where suddenly everything becomes open and you can suddenly do loads and loads of stuff. And As One has a lyric that I think, for me, kind of talks about that, and it talks about a family construct and about how a family operates and how it works. And there's a section about also sexual awakening, the section where he leads me through the swaying nettles growing by the underpass. When he smiles, he looks like a fox, and when he holds me, we will be as one. And here I am talking to my shadow. Here I am, run to me, come to me. The idea of that moment of awakening where you suddenly go, I don't have to do the things that children necessarily have to do. It's 4 minutes 10 seconds, according to the little card that comes in the box set, and there's the lyrics, which are written on there. And then we go into track 2, which is Wastelands. Wastelands, I think, is one of my favourite songs off the album. Although if you were to go, well, what does a typical Suede track sound like? You could probably go, it sounds like Wastelands, actually. So again, the lyric is around moving from adulthood from childhood to adulthood and vice versa. About taking a step out into the big world. And this song was written in November 2016, by the way. So As One, which was one of the very first, was written in June 2016. This was written in November 2016, after the end of the Night Thoughts tour. And unlike the other albums which the band played, none of the songs from the Blue Hour were played live before the album was recorded. So as I've mentioned, Bloodsports and Night Thoughts had a number of the songs that were recorded before the album, or were played live before some of the songs were recorded. A New Morning had the same thing. parts of Coming Up had the same thing, but the Blue Hour is the first one where absolutely nothing from the album had been played live before the album was recorded, but instead the band played through the songs repeatedly to make sure they ironed out all the kinks in it. And we've got Wastelands, which is kind of like a sequel from As One, so all of the songs have a very definite kind of sense of almost being one complete musical piece, like Night Thoughts, but where each one of the songs is separate but also part of a wider whole. And Wastelands is a song that's written about running away. So when you're a grown up, you know, and you kind of go, well, I want to be a child again. So As One is around moving from childhood to adulthood. Wastelands is about that moment where you can kind of still do things like climb up trees. Like I remember the last time I climbed up a tree as a child, and I suddenly realised I'm not 12 anymore. I can't do that. Yeah, I've got to stop. And it felt like I was at the top of the world, but I was only maybe 15 foot up a tree. And I was like kind of going, I think I'm too old for this now. You know, Wastelands is about that moment where you start to realise there are things that you can't do anymore because you're a grown up and you're too old. So there's like a lyric around when it all is much too much, we'll run to the wastelands where the snow is all there is and words sound different, where the fear will fade away and where the children in us will play. And there's bits about, you know, car parks and wastelands and horror and all that stuff around, you know, that moment where you suddenly go, I'm too old to do some of the stuff that I used to do when I was a child. And it's kind of scary. And there's also like a couple of bits of deliberately recorded audio in between some of the songs. So Wastelands, for example, has a section about a section of adults which are looking for a lost child. That type of stuff. So, by the way, Wastelands also originally had the working title of She's Dead, which is following on because it reminded the band of both She's Not Dead and He's Dead from the early period. It was called She's Dead, and for the special bit of recording is that the guitars for this sound different on Wastelands than they do on any of the other songs of the album because the guitars were plugged straight into the desk. They weren't sent through amps, which to get a very distinctive guitar sound, very similar to 10cc. Inspired by Joy Division and Martin Hannett's production tricks, and also the idea around, also the lyric in there about, you know, we'll run away to the wastelands is also kind of ties in with some of the stuff that's in the debut album about the next life, where it goes like, we'll run away to the sea and we'll flog ice creams till the company's on its knees by the sea as well. So there's and the inspiration from T.S. Eliot, which is about measuring out your life in spoons as you sit by the sea and you know you watch the waves going in and coming out. Is that kind of stuff. There's a huge amount of thought in some of these songs, which you only really kind of realise when you listen to them endlessly over and over again. You know, these songs are built for the long haul. Now, song 3 is Mistress. Here is the lyric for that. Again, alongside a picture of what looks to be a wasteland somewhere in, I suspect it's Surrey, but it could be Reading or Herefordshire or anywhere ending in a shire, really, as long as it's not the shire itself and there are no hobbits around. Mistress is again the song that has the idea of a child's perspective of something going wrong inside the family, and it's a child's point of view, that moment of realization when you realize that the God that you thought was your father or your mother has feet of clay. There's shifting viewpoints inside the songs. There's multiple perspectives inside there, and it's also, by the way, directly inspired by Pet Shop Boys' track "Love Is a Catastrophe." This was the very first song that was written for the album. And there's also a section in here which is inspired by, of all things, Capricorn 1, which is pretty surprising, actually. There's kind of like just a section where what he sings about is a section of the section in Capricorn 1 where the mother has to tell the children that their father has died on a mission to the moon or to Mars. I forget which planet they're going to in Capricorn 1, but it's the same kind of thing, the same kind of feeling and ethos that you've got where, as a child, for example, and we didn't have this, but as a child, if your mum actually says to you, mum and dad are going to split up, and it's because, you know, dad's done something he shouldn't have done. And then there's the lyric of Mistress has a night has a lyric where he says, "You're nothing like my mother. Do you hold him like her? Do you need him like her? Is he all that you've got? So you stayed with him again, and you fled with him and travelled in his car, and now you're late. So be with him and hold him. And Mistress, stay with him. Don't tell the neighbours. They don't mean a thing. Now you're in love." And it's kind of like, wow, man, that's heavy stuff. And having lived through something like that when I was a child, it was different because everyone's story is different. I was like, that song was really heavy for me to listen to the first time I heard it, and I was like, I'm not sure I've got the emotional muscle to approach this and to carry some of the ideas that are in the song, because sometimes art comes really close to what you're experiencing or what you have experienced in the context of your life, and you kind of go, I'm not sure I can do this. I mentioned it previously about when I was writing something when I was in my 20s about somebody whose mother was dying and then my mum died. And you kind of go, I'm not sure I'm ready for art to imitate life, or life to imitate art in that respect. The fourth song is Beyond the Outskirts. Symbolic picture there, obviously a picture of some railings and some fencing, as much to keep you in as it is to keep whatever's out there out. And the point of Beyond the Outskirts is quite clear. So really about being trapped inside a small town. Obviously Brett's experience was growing up in Howard's Heath. My experience was growing up in a suburb of Birmingham, which felt like a very small town. The concept of going from Birmingham to Wolverhampton or to Coventry or Walsall was like, you might as well have said, you can go to Pluto. I'm like, is that even still a planet? I don't know. But it's around, escape. It's around self, the walls that you build around yourself, the things that stop you from doing the things that you want to do, and about running away from home. And I think all of us had a moment where we were younger and we kind of thought, I'm going to run away from home. I did it for about 20 minutes, and I think about 1984. And that's not flippant. I did. I went to the bottom of the hill and I was like, a bit cold, and I think I'm going to get hungry in a bit. I think I'm going to come back. And I ran away from home, and I got about 15 minutes walk away, and then I came back, and I don't think anybody had ever noticed I'd gone, because I was so quiet coming in and so quiet going out. Nobody noticed I'd left the house. But Beyond the Outskirts is about that idea of, firstly, that barrier between being a child to an adult, about growing up, leaving home, going on to do something else, but also running away from home, and the stepping outside of the world which is defined for you when you're younger. And it's like, so the lyric is, beyond the outskirts, come with us, we're small town dreaming, we'll jump out of the page and into the fire. And I lie here staring at the ceiling and wondering what's happening outside. I wonder where you are tonight. And those four songs all together kind of like have a number of threads and themes that run in between and alongside each other. The move from childhood to adulthood, from adulthood to childhood, the moment where you step outside of the world, you go into some new environment and you experience, the ideas or the scales falling from your eyes in some respects. Track 5 is Chalk Circles, which is a strange song. It's not really a song as such, it's more a bit of connective tissue that links Beyond the Outskirts and Cold Hands together, and it's got a kind of dark, weird chanting. And by the way, Chalk Circles and the subsequent song Cold Hands were both written on the same day, so you can kind of think that they're pretty much inseparable from each other, in the same way that Pale Snow on Night Thoughts is a song that's very, very short. It's only about 2.5 minutes long. It's only got maybe one or two parts. It's not fully realised, but it exists as a song that connects the rest of the album together. If you separated it out on its own, so, for example, I think the first time they played Pale Snow was at Glastonbury in 2015. I was listening to it and I was kind of going, I can't see how this is going to fit onto the record. I don't know where it's going to go. And that's because actually it makes more sense with the missing part that I hadn't yet heard, because they hadn't played it live, that goes together. And it's about designed the lyrical kind of idea of Chalk Circles, and the melodic approach and the thump and the rhythm and the meter that it goes to, which is kind of deliberately designed to invoke slightly weird, broken 70s children TV shows. And some children's TV shows in the 70s in the UK in the 80s were really weird. Things like Nosy Bonk and you know, Rent a Ghost, and there's some nightmare fuel in there. Alongside, by the way, the fantastic public service information film I Am the Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water, and the idea that every child would, if they were allowed to, would climb up the top of an electricity pylon to rescue a frisbee. I'd be like, no, I've seen that public service information film. There's no way I'm going to be doing that. You know, the outside world was portrayed to me as a dark and scary place full of terrifying things. And as an adult, I've realised that that is exactly correct, by the way, because I have seen the future, baby. And it has Boris Johnson as our current Prime Minister for the next couple of days, which is a terrifying prospect. We also have the next song, which is Cold Hands. And Cold Hands, by the way, originally they wanted to sample some dialogue from a quite obscure 70s horror movie called And Soon the Darkness, which was very recently on Talking Pictures, which is just one of those really strange auteur horror movies. And it's very popular. There's loads and loads of them around. If you watch, kind of, you go into Amazon and Netflix and stuff, kind of low budget British horror is they're absolutely rampant. It feels like there's at least one great horror movie that's made for about 17 pence that's released every week in the UK. But And Soon the Darkness is a really strange serial killer movie about two uh, adolescent girls that go on a cycling holiday in France, how it all goes very, very wrong. And of course, the idea was that in the 70s is that that was, again, the kind of fate that could befall you when you're on that cusp between childhood and adulthood, and you're kind of operating in an adult world and people are treating you like an adult, but really you're a child. You don't quite know what's going on, and it's all a bit scary. And suddenly there's moments where you kind of go, I'm way out of my depth. I'm too far out. I can't go back. And sometimes you don't know you're too far out until you realise you want to go back, and you can't. And I suppose that's probably one of the reasons why the picture for Chalk Circles, sorry, Cold Hands, is of a desolate child's playground covered in snow. Is that there's a an idea of put your cold hands on me, take a spin of the wheel, and I'll follow you down. I'm a hair in the cat's eyes, and we'll see how the hair dies. And you kind of go, well, that's dark and scary, but again, I walked into the trap with my eyes wide shut, and I never knew what it would be like. Again, it's the same type of thing. Now we have track 7, one of the finest Suede songs ever, an absolute classic. Life is Golden, here with a particularly drowned and gorgeous Duplo child there in a bright shiny jumper. The video for Life is Golden, by the way, I think it was shot in Chernobyl. I could be wrong. I think it's all drone footage of Chernobyl. But it's a song which has closed a lot of Suede shows over the years since it was released. It's undoubtedly an absolute classic. It's a kind of like a break. It's a breath of fresh air, and the moment where the action stops and you kind of have just a little bit of moment, like the moment in an action movie where shit's dark and suddenly the guy says something funny. Not in the James Bond way, but it's shocking when the guy gets electrocuted in a bath in I think it's Goldfinger or From Russia with Love. But that moment where there's just a moment of levity and optimism, the moment where suddenly the clouds part and you can realise that above the clouds is still the sun and it's still shining, and sometimes it's still poking through there. This is a song from Brett to his children about their future and this sense of optimism that they have being young and having the ability to change the future and to define the future for who it is. Somewhat oddly, there's a couple of things in here. Firstly, this is one of the few Suede songs that's recorded on a Fender and not a Gibson 355, by the way. Secondly, it was mixed on the same mixing desk which was used for Nevermind the Bollocks, Talk Talk Spirit of Eden, and Suede's very own Sound of the Streets, by the way. And it's got a spoken word section at the end which has been deleted from the final mix. So when you listen to it, there's a moment where you kind of go, wow, it's a gorgeous instrumental section. And yes, there was a spoken word section there, but it's not on the record. The final thing I will say about it is it's at a very unusual BPM. It's at 79 beats per minute, which, by the way, 79 is apparently the atomic mass of gold. So Life is Golden, and the atomic mass there tying in with Chernobyl being in the video. I might be reading a bit too much into this, and were we still in the days of the printed music press, you might very well put me in Suede's corner, but let's hope that you don't. And then track 8 is Roadkill, featuring the Dead Birds. I saw one of the very few times the band have played this song live. I think they played it live twice, 3 times maybe. Certainly the first time they played it was at HMV, and I think that was before the album had come out. So the first time I heard Roadkill was when the band were playing it live in front of me, and I was like, I'm not sure about this. I'm still not sure about it as a song. But there's a moment, as a child, where you suddenly see, for example, Roadkill, or if you're in a car with your parents and you look out the window and suddenly see a flash of something small and brown that goes past, and you suddenly realise it's like a badger or a hedgehog or something that was killed by a truck, and there's that moment where you suddenly realise that actually there's mortality is all around you in every street and in every room, and it's just you can't see it. Death is everywhere. There are flies on the windscreen, as the great Depeche Modes has it. Next song is Tides, and now we start to see that the lyric inserts are starting to move to something that's in colour and a little bit more open and a little bit brighter. Tides, I think, is a really good song. It covers in lyrically, it revisits some of the themes that we had from Night Thoughts, the ones about water coming in, about waves, about drowning. But also Tides is specifically designed to sound like something like Susie and the Banshees or Pill or Magazine. John McGeoch, one of the best guitarists that there ever was, very underrated in his lifetime, to the point where he couldn't really get a band gig, and by the end of his life he was working in a hospital and hadn't played his guitar professionally for a number of years, which is tragic, thinking about all the music that we didn't get because of the fact that he just couldn't, he needed to pay his bill. It has a very specific structure, so it's very circular. It's got a very small minimal number of parts and variations upon there. So for example, it's got a verse and it's got a chorus, but it hasn't got a bridge, and it's specifically designed to kind of create this sense of a vortex of being sucked in by the water, and being kind of built in, and being kind of like enveloped and seduced by something. It also, by the way, has a glockenspiel in it, which is the same glockenspiel that was used by the Clash on the Call Up, according to what Neil said on the commentary, because the glockenspiel still had the word Strummer on a bit of tape next to it in the studio. But it's also ties in. There's a line here about like a rain of bombs will drop from the sky, a rain of fire. Now, as I've mentioned previously, at the time when Suede were children, which was the late 70s, early 80s, this was the time of things like the Threads and CND and the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and the concept that we were just one 4-minute warning away from instant extinction in the inevitable nuclear winter that was going to wipe us all out. Track 10, Don't Be Afraid That Nobody Loves You. This is one of the singles from the album. This is a fantastic track. Buried at track 10, to be honest. It should be played at every show. And it's, I think, it came together really, really quickly as a song. You listen to it and you can kind of hear an element of Sex Pistols in there. You can see an element of Magazine. You can also hear a little bit of what I think the Matt called the Midlands. So there's like a section which has got this crunchy guitar sound on it, and you listen to it and you kind of go, whoa, that's total Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, classic 70s. But because it's stuck through a Suede filter, you don't necessarily realise that when people were saying about in the early 90s, Suede were kind of glam rock, they weren't really around that at all. There was elements of it, but there was more elements of the heaviness with the tenderness that came with it. So you could hear parts of that in T-Rex, but you could hear parts of that in Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, and some of the fantastic metal tracks, which were almost like a blues rock, a super heavy form of blues rock. So it's what they called the Midlands section. And having come from the Midlands, and having shared rehearsal rooms with Black Sabbath and Napalm Death and people like that, you kind of listen to it and you go, to me, it's in the water. It's just part of who I am, and perhaps for other people it would be completely alien. But for me, it was just a thing that was in the air, like being aware of oxygen and weird chocolates and stuff was part of it. Track 12 is it's All the Wild Places. I think. Yep, All the Wild Places. No, it isn't. Yeah, it is. It's All the Wild Places. There it is. Track 12, which when the band played it live, Brett generally played it without a microphone, just him and an acoustic guitar and singing alone. It was originally a piano song with a full band arrangement. It was written for Night Thoughts, but the band chose not to use it. They chose to come back to it and revisit it later on. Great song, but it fit more into the Blue Hour approach there. And then number 13 on the album is The Invisibles, which is the first song which we heard from the album. And it is heavily influenced by people like Scott Walker and by Bond theme tunes, because it's kind of got minor chords and an orchestra that's with it. It's influenced by Shakespeare's Sonnet 38, which is I swear my love is, let me just quickly check that. I swear my love is, no, I can't read my writing. Sorry. So for those of you, by the way, that think I just do this completely off my head, I've got a set list down here that tells me everything which I want to talk about. I'm always glancing over there. I shouldn't. The magician shouldn't be showing his tricks. But also, The Invisibles is a song that, for me, it feels like when you're invisible in the world and you're not regarded as one of the beautiful people, what's your life like? You still have hopes and dreams and desires and ambitions and all the stuff that goes with it, but the world kind of just sidelines you and goes, oh, you're little people, you don't really matter. Your role is to be work in a factory, or to not earn a huge amount of money, and to struggle and to die and to get old and to be absolutely ordinary. And it's like, even to somebody that's classified as ordinary, I'm ordinary, like, we're the leads of our own lives, we're the stars of our world, and we have all of the hopes and ambitions that we would expect to have. So why would we not want to achieve greatness in our way? And it's kind of annoying that people kind of think that we're just nobodies, but there you are. The last song on the album, by the way, track 14. This is one of the very best Suede songs of all time. If I had a top 5, The Fur and the Feathers, Sometimes I Feel I'll Float Away, and this would be in that top 5. It is Flytipping. It is an incredible song, and I've seen the band play it 4 or 5 times, and it's an absolute monster. It really is. It's firstly, it's this gorgeous song about possessions and around death and mortality. So you think about the opening of the album, about childhood moving into adulthood, adulthood moving into childhood, and about all the things that go with it. The idea around identity and perception. Flytipping is around the end of your life, and it takes a cue from the Brett Solo song, The More We Possess, the less we own of ourselves. But also the idea around, what is life? Is it just buying stuff and then throwing it away at the end and fly tipping it all? The concept of built-in obsolescence to things like mobile phones and computers, and even audio formats, VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, those type of things. The idea that we don't own things, we just consume them and then we dispose of them, and that built-in obsolescence that goes with it. It's got a very kind of specific kind of approach to... Hang on a second. Yep, sorry, I just had to check my notes there. It's also influenced by an artist called, I think, called Michael Lady, who destroyed everything that he owned. He fed it into a grinder and it just crunched up absolutely everything, so he was left with absolutely nothing. And the idea that the concept of the value of the things that he had been destroyed was not what they cost, but what they were worth to him. And then there's the lyric in Flytipping, the one which I think is to me is absolutely pivotal to the album, which is, what is mine and what is yours? Do we own these things? What has it all been for? Flytipping on the road, of course. And if the way that the lyric is sung is, it has other meanings as well, around what is mine, what is yours, what were these things, what was it for, what was love, what was any of it, what was it any of it for, what was the point? And it's like about taking the things that you have and you ascribe a meaning to them by the activity that you have. And ultimately, whilst every record is just a slab of plastic, at the end what we're looking at is glorious works of art which have an immense meaning. The other thing about Flytipping, and I really do need to mention this, is that the end of the song, this is possibly Richard Oakes' finest recorded solo. It's about 4 minutes, and it's almost an overture of musical themes and motifs that is played throughout the rest of the album, all combined together into one incredible solo. People say, oh, Bernard Butler was the best guitarist in Suede. No, he wasn't. Richard Oakes is a fucking genius, and Neil Codling is not far off the same, actually. And those two people have had an enormous input on, and are very underrated purely by the fact that they aren't the guys that were in the band when the band first became famous. They joined afterwards, which is, I think, really insulting to the talent and artistry that they have. The solo in Flytipping is incredible. And because it's not played by Bernard Butler, people don't give it the respect that it deserves. It really is. And then the album itself ends on a reprise and a repeat of the musical motifs that open as One and Wastelands. And that is the album as a symphony of 14 connected musical pieces that all work together to create one cohesive whole. The Blue Hour is a phenomenally good album, and I rate it to bits. I've barely talked about any of the other stuff that goes with it. So I think I'm just going to have to skip it and go, yep, so they toured in 2018, and I saw them, I think, 6 times. I saw them at Rough Trade, and I saw them at HMV. I saw a couple of shows in Europe. I saw a couple of shows in London, and I also saw them again in Bristol and in London again in 2019. And then lockdown happened, and they wrote another record. They're just about to release it in the next couple of months, not a couple of weeks actually. That album is called Autofiction, and it is going to be great because I've heard 4 or 5 songs from it already, but I'll talk about that after the album comes out. In the meantime, what I will say is The Blue Hour by Suede is a very, very underrated record. It's really bloody good. I rate it highly. And by the way, it is no coincidence when you look at the front that there is a child on the front, because the whole album is around aging and moving from a child into adulthood into late stage life, around growing older. And if there's one of the things that Suede have proven, is that you can grow old and still make great art. And it's something that everyone should aspire to. It's one of the things I find really, really important in the music that I love, is listening to the music I love played by bands and that are telling me and expanding my mind now about what it is to be alive now. What's it like to be an older person? Lots of pop music is aimed at young people, and sometimes that's why people, when they get older, is they only listen to the music that reminds them of being younger, or when they get older they stop listening to music. Suede are one of the very few bands that have grown old with dignity and grace and created fantastic music